Republican Party, it's the Democratic Leadership Committee. The Clintons, the Roms, the Clinton manager who was appointed to the Simpson-Bowles Commission, Erskine Bowles. So what Mr. Obama is doing is really pushing forth now the recommendations of the Simpson-Bowles Commission that he'd appointed right after he was elected, but before he took office. So he's now says that, okay, he's going to go with this bipartisan commission, and the Republicans will pretend to say, well, we really wanted to get the deal done. We've got a lot. And they'll go along with what really is a Republican program. What can the Democrats do? They're stymied.
Now, Obama wants to cut $4 trillion out of the budget, while the Republican leader, Boehner, only wants a $2.4 trillion cut. I've also read that it was Obama, not the Republicans, who proposed putting Social Security cuts on the table. Why would Obama be proposing much larger cuts than the Republicans?
For two reasons. Number one, he can get away with it. No Republican administration could ever have got away with cutting Social Security. That is the most basic income protection program that Americans have, and it was sold as saying, look, this is not a social welfare program, it's not a tax, this is money that you've put in. In order to double-cross his constituency, only a Democrat could do it. And only a Democrat posing as a left-winger could really pull the double-cross that Mr. Obama is posing.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Guns, Finance, and Butter. Finance is the new mode of warfare. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. China has warned the U.S., quote, do not default. What would be the implications and ramifications of a U.S. default? Would a U.S. default put the entire global banking system into crisis?
Nothing would happen at all. Everybody knows there's not going to be a default. China would not lose a cent on this. China would say, okay, if you can't pay us the treasury bills, that's okay. There's a lot of American investment in China. We'll just take possession of it at its book value. They wouldn't mind that very much. A default would mean that the dollar would not be acceptable again until the United States paid. And again, there's not going to be a default. But if there were, America would have no way of paying for its military bases anymore. America would be unable to extend the war. Mr. Obama couldn't be the war president. I mean, even before he took office, he won the Nobel War Prize. So you knew that he was going to escalate wherever he could. That's what the War Prize is given for. That's why it was given to Kissinger and to other people who go to war. And he wouldn't be able to extend the war into Libya. He wouldn't be able to extend it to the other Near East. He wouldn't be able to surround Russia with more nuclear weapons. He wouldn't be able to attack the bases in Afghanistan and Pakistan. He wouldn't be able to follow his war to become the war president that he set out to be.
Would U.S. default send interest rates soaring? And if so, what would be the economic effect?
An interest rate wouldn't matter if you default. I mean, if you tell me I can rent you an IOU, but you're not going to collect, I'll give you 20%. What does it matter if you default? No, it wouldn't send interest rates soaring at all. It wouldn't have any effect at all. This is all a just pretend argument to create the crisis, to give Mr. Obama the opportunity to do what politicians do, to sell out his constituency to his campaign contributors on Wall Street. He's going to go down as a Hubert Hoover, or rather a Warren Harding, probably. He's going to go down as the man who brought on the Depression that the Republicans never could have gotten away with. Only a Democrat posing as a left-winger could support the anti-labor, anti-wage, pro-Wall Street policies that his advisors have been pressing. And there again, that came out in the New York Times interview with Sheila Bair.
I see. So this is a charade put on for public consumption, the business of a possible debt default.
It's to create the illusion of a crisis. No politician or Wall Street really likes a crisis. But what they do like is the illusion of a crisis to create a pretense for introducing a solution to the crisis that actually makes fortunes for them all. And the way in which Obama resolves the non-crisis of the budget limit is going to make fortunes for Wall Street and impoverish the population for the next decade.
I see. So this is a way of getting away with all of this.
Yes.
I was going to ask you if there are elements within the U.S. establishment who would actually want a default, but it sounds to me like it's just a charade.
It's a charade. Nobody wants to default. The safest investment there is are Treasury bills. America's whole international position would go. The whole basis of American diplomacy and military power is the ability to write IOUs that it never intends to pay. I mean, America, you could say America defaulted back in August of 1971 when it closed the gold window. What can China do with its treasury bonds already? The Americans will be glad to give them another treasury bond with a new maturity, but it won't let China buy oil companies or filling stations or anything else. It won't let them buy industrial companies or technology exports. I mean, it's already, in effect, the whole international monetary system based on the dollar has been in default for the last 30 years.
Is the U.S. in an economic war with China?
No, not really a war. There's a jockeying for position, but there's no economic war. I've never heard any anti-American expression whatsoever in China. Only on MSNBC do I hear China bashing, and I guess from Paul Krugman I hear it. But even when Paul Krugman goes to China, he makes $1 million, by giving speeches. But there's no real warfare.
Dr. Hudson, let's talk a bit now about Europe, starting with Greece. You have written that the Greek economy will not end up with the proceeds of any European Central Bank bailout. The banks will get the money. Could you explain that?
That's right. The condition of the loans that the EU and the IMF are making to Greece is that all of the money has to be paid out to bondholders of these banks, mainly in France and in Germany. Angela Merkel in Germany said that, wait a minute, this isn't what the free market's supposed to be all about. If they make a bad loan, the bondholders can be wiped out. The depositors are protected, but not the bondholders. This is exactly what Sheila Bair said in her New York Times interview. But the bank said, look, the bondholders have to be paid first, the domestic economy later, and they've corrupted, basically, the socialist government in Greece. Now, this returns us to what we were talking about at the beginning of this show. You have in Greece the socialist government. The premier, Papandreou, is head of the Socialist International, the Second International. He's pushing for the austerity program and the bank bailouts that will hopelessly indebt Greece and force it to sell off much of its economy. The conservatives are opposing this, just like Michelle Bachmann here was saying she was opposing TARP and the bank bailouts. The conservatives in Greece and actually throughout Europe are to the left of the socialist parties. The same thing happens in Britain with the British Labour Party being on the ultra-right for privatization, privatizing the railroads and other things that even Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives couldn't do. In Iceland, it's the Social Democrats that were pushing for bailing out the banks that the Conservative parties and the Icelandic population were against. Same thing in Ireland. All over Europe, the socialists are now on the right wing of the political spectrum. Now that politics is all about finance. And the fact is that finance has nothing to do with the right or the left wing of the political spectrum. It spans the whole spectrum. And the terminology and the political concepts that existed a century ago when the Social Democratic and the Labour parties were being formed were basically concerned with employer-employee relations, labor unionization vis-a-vis heavy industry. That's not the case today. Today you have a war of finance, not only against consumers and employees, but against industry. You have industries being financialized. That's what they talk about in business schools. In fact, Bob Locke and others are coming out with a good book by Zed Books in the fall, all about how this management philosophy is disabling economies. Management philosophy, financialization, is also disabled socialist politics and left-wing politics. You don't hear very much at all in America, either in the socialist parties, the democratic parties, or in Europe about financial issues and economic issues. It's about cultural issues, minorities, sexual equality, but it's not about the economic issues. So almost without anybody preparing a political alternative, you've had a transformation of what begun as an economic democracy into a financial oligarchy. This is going to be the main problem for the next century. How to cope with the emerging financial oligarchy that has been empowered by the financial bubble, and most of all by the bailout. When Bush and Obama gave $13 trillion to Wall Street's managers, they've empowered a whole century of ruling class people, much as the 19th century railroad barons were empowered by giving them the western lands and all the money for the railroads, and much of the great land barons and real estate interests were created in much of the third world. So you've created a rentier oligarchy that is exactly the opposite of everything that was expected at the early 19th century and into the 1930s. In the middle of the Great Depression in 1936, Keynes wrote his general theory of employment interest, and his last chapter called for euthanasia of the rentier. Well, what we have now, instead of the euthanasia of the rentier, is the euthanasia of the employees, the euthanasia of industry, the euthanasia of entire economies, in order to siphon off rent extraction and interest and financial fees to the very top of an economy. And nothing like this has really occurred in Western civilization since the conquest of Europe 1,000 years ago. It did occur in the Roman Empire when the creditors took over, and we all know what happened to that. We had a dark age, and you talked about recession. Well, we're not only moving into a depression, but the question is the depression going to keep on going? And what kind of a society are we going to have if we have the kind of tax shift off wealth onto employees, onto labor, onto industry, onto the cities, and privatization, meaning a sell-off and sort of pre-bankruptcy sale on credit, and essentially an oligarchy emerging. That's what nobody's talking on either end of the political spectrum.
Will the IMF and EU bailout for Greece lead to another default?
Yes. There's no conceivable way in which Greece can pay the money that's being demanded. The Financial Times of London has been very clear on this for the last month or so. You can read the columns on the editorial page, the op-ed page, and you can see that almost everybody realizes that they can't be paid. All you have to do is look at the premium for default insurance for Greek bonds to see that. So the question is, if Greece can't pay anyway, why are they even going through the charade? Well, the reason they're going through the charade is so that the commercial banks can then sell all of the bonds that they do have. They can be reimbursed and sell the bonds to their own commercial banks and the suckers. They're letting the people who now are holding the bag take the money and run. So what they're doing is saying, okay, the commercial banks can sell out to the IMF and the central bank, and now it's much harder to default on an intergovernmental debt if it's the government of Europe against the government of Greece than it is for the commercial banks. And again, the Greeks can say, well, we know the game that you're playing. You were the people that lent the money to us to pay the bank. We didn't get a penny of it. You, in effect, paid your own banks. This is your problem. We're not going to pay you. You don't like it? Kick us out.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Guns, Finance, and Butter. Finance is the new mode of warfare. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. How is the European Central Bank different from central banks of other countries?
Very important question. Central banks, from the Bank of England in 1694 to the Federal Reserve in 1913, were funded and created to finance the government deficit. The idea was that government spending would be fueled by banks just creating on their typewriters or their printing press or now on their computer keyboard. They would create money. What we know as money is created on computer keyboards, whether commercial banks do it or central banks do.